Yes, guys, welcome back to... Oh, am I on this? Sorry. Just have to show. Okay. Keep it in. Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon podcast. How are you? I hope you're doing very, very well. We're smiling, but we're dying inside. Martin Ødegaard has... we don't actually know. The latest information that we have is from Jan Argia. How do I say that name, George? Someone's gonna be...
You're asking me to pronunciate words?
You know what? That was silly. That was a silly question.
If anyone caught that, pronunciate.
Pronunciate, exactly. The king of malapropisms. Jan Argia Fjørtoft is a Norwegian journalist, and he said the doctor of the Norwegian national team to VG Sporten about Martin Ødegaard's injury. Injuries like this take minimum 3 weeks. Anything else is a bonus, and it can take longer time. Both Ståle, the national coach, and I know that next national game, so 10th of October, he'll be very doubtful. They're investigating it now. There's probably no breach in this foot, i.e. there's no fracture or break, but it's obviously pain. Ankle injuries are very painful straight away. Martin had extreme pain. He was very worried. So as of recording, so we're recording the 11th of September, that's the latest information that we have. We're going to talk about that. We did just do a whole rewatch of the Brighton game. We finally plucked up the courage to go and have a look at the Brighton game. Turns out more things happened than the Declan Rice incident, which is pretty crazy. So if you want to go check that out, we did that. There's actually loads in there, and we kind of want to talk about the eights and the usage of the eight, just to get a sense of what we are looking at, what we're actually trying to replace with Martin Ødegaard, because I think that's a conversation. The vast majority of this video will be us looking at how we replace Martin Ødegaard, what we do for Spurs, and then kind of moving forward. But I would go check out that rewatch because it's really interesting, and it's available for patrons and YouTube members. We're not just trying to sell it, to have a look at the sort of the eights and that. And I know you've got some thoughts on our eights and our usage of that at the moment, which we looked at in the rewatch.
Yeah, really quickly, because it will relate to how we have to replace Martin Ødegaard, especially how we've been using him. But right now, the Martin Ødegaard of last season that people really looked at and said, wow, that's a really top player, was the Martin Ødegaard that was dropping into the pivot, dictating play in the middle third. That's not how he's been used. That's not the role that we've used him in to start the season. And so when you're talking about replacements, my retort would always be, do you want what you want last season, or do you want what you want right now? And how do you want to replace that? Because what you watch on the Brighton rewatch, which is really clear, our ability to use our pivot to drop out of the block. So that just means if you've got a two pivot that are being well marked by an opposition, they're dropping into the back line to where Saliba would be the middle of the three. And they're dropping in there to basically push Saliba out. And they're using that to try to create space. And very similar, if anybody that watches basketball, to like create a screen, they're kind of going out of the way to draw somebody out to create space behind them.
Yeah.
And that's what they're reverse engineering space. And so you basically got somebody drop out to quarterback, quote unquote, your build up. And that's how the pivot has been interacting, as opposed to last season when the pivot had a high eight in Martin Ødegaard drop in to create that space. Same idea, but different line of engagement. So again, as a quick review, we talk about line of engagements in terms of your defensive line, your midfield line, and your forward line. What we had was somebody from midfield that was dropping into the defensive line in this Brighton game, whereas before I'd say that Martin Ødegaard, who was part of the forward in our press, in our 4-4-2, dropping into the midfield line to create space. Same thing, different way of dropping, but still dropping the same way.
Yeah.
So the issue is right now our eights. What's the issue that we're finding? They're quite low touch. They're not being on the ball as much. And I think in terms of asking whether or not you want Declan Rice and Martin Ødegaard to be low touch, that's a question for another day. But that's the dilemma that we're having in terms of our eights and what we might need to look to recreate with Martin Ødegaard out. Do you want to recreate that, or do you want to recreate what we saw last season?
Yeah. And you can really see that in the rewatch. So yeah, definitely go check that out. But the rest of this video, we're going to be looking at a little tactics board, Georgie boy. Okay, so we're on the tactics board. We did just have a bit of a nightmare where I had about 10 players and then 9 players and then 12 players. So we're now on the tactics board. This is our kind of nominal setup so far. You could argue about the relationships or whatever, and I'd play this player, that player, whatever, but this is a kind of nominal setup so far. We are, for Spurs, going to be without Martin Ødegaard. We are going to be without Declan Rice. And we are, of course, going to be without Mikel Merino. So we're going to take him out the sort of suspension as well and pull Calafiori down here. Okay. We're going to build what we would do against Spurs. I think we maybe both agree that probably Mikel will involve the likes of Jorginho. Mikel will probably involve the likes of Trossard. Mikel will probably, I don't know. I feel that Mikel sort of generally defers to sort of seniority. But I know that you wanted to talk about a potential option of Saka inside. I know you wanted to talk about potentially Raheem Sterling getting his first start for Arsenal. I know you wanted to talk about a little option of Timber inside. And then you also wanted to talk about Calafiori. That is 11 players. Tell me it is, George, please.
It is 11
Okay,
players.
Lovely. Why would you go for this lineup against Spurs?
Yeah, so when you're looking at replacing Martin Odegaard, what are you looking to replace? Okay, there's two facets of this. Number one, you're looking to replace the kind of ability to get out of tight spaces. You're looking out also at the ability to kind of replace that out of possession press and that out of possession thrust. And so between both Timber and Saka, you get that. You get that confirmation of the second balls. You get the confirmation of somebody being able to really track people up high and provide that intense pressure to the marker. But then you also provide somebody that's secure under contact, under any circumstance, able to turn out of pressure in any circumstance, and also give Bukayo Saka that freedom to really be the main man. Martin Odegaard was the main man in the other team. Here, you're asking yourself, who do you want to have the most touches? And I want Bukayo Saka to have the most touches in this team. By the way, I want that whilst Martin Odegaard is out. I think you have to look at replacing your engine room in the best way possible. Now, versus Spurs, I love this lineup because Spurs can't defend wide spaces. They actually cannot. And so when you look at it, that's the space to exploit. So we need to have two runners that are willing to go on the outside and run from out to in. Saka can do this. The issue is I don't trust the replacements on the inside as much as I do Saka. So for me, this is why I like this Martinelli and Sterling as two really wide options to hold the width and attack and kind of be able to feed. Now we've got two passers, in my opinion, that can feed these runners. Timber, very underrated his creative passing ability in these high areas. So he's able to feed Martinelli in quite brilliantly.
Yeah, I think in these areas.
Yeah, and also Saka is also able to feed Sterling brilliantly in those half spaces. And what we do have is we have an ability to keep Kai Havertz in his role up top to also stretch. Right now, you've got three forwards that will stretch this Spurs back line, and I don't think that Spurs do well running back to goal. And I don't think you've lost too much defensive solidity in this lineup. You've got Calafiori now that can operate on the slant, that can come in with Thomas Partey, giving you a little bit of options in which you might have, for example, Calafiori drop into the left center back, and then Gabriel goes to left back. We've seen that switch in our build-up. Or you see a simple 4-4-2 here, as you've kind of brought in.
As the sort of out of possession stuff in this lineup, is that how you see it? Is that how you'd want us to sort of sit in our sort of 4-4-2 mid-block? So this puts the emphasis on Saka as probably the trigger, because we generally use Ødegaard in this role, obviously, and Saka's here. And Ødegaard's the one who's kind of leading the press. Havertz will lock on, Martinelli locks on. This is usually obviously Declan Rice, someone's stepping in here. Do you see that working? My only pushback against that is Kai Havertz has always been in this kind of first line. And because of the size of him and the sort of the stride pattern, the stride length and stuff, I wonder whether Mikel will trust Havertz to be the leader of the press a little bit more, just because he's got that experience in that first line. Do you agree, or would you keep it as Saka?
I'd keep it as Saka. I mean, only because he's probably one of the most diligent trackers of markers. Look, Havertz can jump. I think that's a little, I'll be honest, that's a small thing. Like if he's going to be the jumper and Havertz and Saka the support shadow marker, that's fine. It'll switch in game. And I think that'll have more to do actually with wanting Romero to have the ball as opposed to Van de Ven, especially versus Spurs specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, no, I have no problem with this. So this is one way that you're able to do it.
Interesting. Let us know what you think about that one in the comments. Actually, I'm going to keep Partey in here. Please keep me updated on my have I got 11 players on the pitch counter, because I'm not good at that. So I'd set a match. I am actually going to pull Martinelli off. I'm going to say without Ødegaard involved, sort of now moving forward, because potentially he's out for a couple of weeks. I'm also going to say without Marino. So let's say without Ødegaard and Marino. We now do have Rice back. Would you continue in, say, the games against Atalanta? Would you continue in the games against Manchester City away and so on and so forth? Let's say we don't have them before the next international break. How would you address that? Would you continue with the Saka thing inside? Would you potentially involve Nwaneri in any way? Would you move Trossard inside? How would you approach that?
Nwaneri is a like for like. I don't love that as a consistent play. I think to go straight from having made your debut for like 15 minutes and having cameos to be a consistent starter is something that I'm not a fan of, but I love him as a player. So I'm not going to complain at him being brave. But he's very like for like. It's just not something that I would do because we have incredibly tough fixtures. If this was any other run of fixtures, I'd be more willing. But you're talking Spurs, City, Atlanta. That's tough. And then I think, what are the next couple? I think Leicester's in there as well in the month of September. And I'd be more willing against Leicester to do something like that. But no, Spurs and City and even Atlanta, who are top side, Gasperini, that's a tough match. So no, I wouldn't be doing that. Okay. Here, Calafiori must play in this setup. You've got to pivot, and I'd make Thomas Partey what a lot of people want Timber in right central midfielder for. So I would have Declan Rice just shift the block a little bit. So Partey's the anchor, but make Declan Rice the anchor. And then you can have either Trossard in the left or Jesus on the left.
In that side with Trossard on the left, would you stick with that? Would you have Martinelli or Jesus on the left?
So if we have Trossard, Martinelli.
Got you.
And if Jesus is going to be the winger, then I do need to switch some stuff around. Sure. And I'd probably have to have Timber involved because of just the pairing. Martinelli for me is really diligent. But Trossard I'd like to operate here. And Trossard operates more of a second striker in this role. Now, also what you can do and what you're going to likely have is Havertz drop into that left central midfielder role and Trossard be more of that false nine.
Yeah, you can see those rotations happening 100%. And I also quite like that out of possession as well. I think there's a solid base there with Martinelli and Rice and Saka back in that sort of 4-4-2 mid block. I think that really works for us. Why Calafiori specifically and not Timber?
Okay, so the reason is number one, aerially. Number two, in these zones with Thomas Partey there, Timber is overkill. I need somebody that's willing to offer an overlap on Martinelli, and I want to keep Trossard inside. I don't want to have Trossard be the one to overlap out wide, and Timber on the outside on that overlap is less potent and less willing to do that. So I think in here, you've got a lot of people that are central runners. Trossard and Havertz will interchange very well. You want Martinelli not to be isolated. If you want that not to happen, then you need to have somebody willing to make that run on the outside.
I see that.
Whereas with Timber, both Timber and Trossard will both want to underlap and both will want to have the same run. So you got to make a decision about which option you want.
Yeah, I hear that. My only possible concern with that one is this Partey role. The athleticism concerns possibly in terms of the running that he might have to do. I appreciate he's not in the first line in terms of the line of engagement and when we're out of possession. Do you see Partey stepping up? Let's say we are in the final third. We're sort of in our usual type shape. Maybe White's come up to support. Havertz is in the box. Trossard supporting Martinelli's far side. What do you see as Partey's role in here?
Partey would be, I think, switch Saka and White. And you've got that. You've got exactly what I would want him to do. I'd want him to be defending those right central midfield spaces. And in fact, I think if you really want me to be technical, I think it's actually worse him defending center of the pitch. That's actually the worst zone for him to defend. Ideally, like Saliba's behind him in terms of covering for him and being that pressure, from behind and that even that support. But somebody running back to goal centrally, you're much more dangerous. I mean, if I was to lose the ball wide as opposed to centrally, I'd prefer it wide. Now, one thing that you could do here is, I know, voice crack. One thing that you could do here is you could have Timber in the space of Partey here, who performs the exact same role as Thomas Partey.
Yep.
If you're worried. And people might be saying that looks kind of weird, but Timber at right central midfield here is absolutely an option. And just because of my OCD, just swap Havertz and Trossard because people are more comfortable with that iteration. And you start to see
A Rice Havertz
something
Timber
that's
midfield. Yeah, I see that.
yeah, you see something that's really quite cohesive. Now, Jesus could operate in the Trossard role, by the way, just as easily as Trossard is able to here. The only issue is I don't know how fit he is, so I haven't really wanted to do it. But the theory is the exact same thing. You've got this false nine person that likes to drop. Havertz can have the space to fly in. The only thing is I just feel like Jesus, when he does drop in, I don't trust him to be as tempoed. And we're already introducing quite a bit of change. And Calafiori on that side, you have to remember, is the maverick of sorts. So he is somebody that's going to force play. He is somebody that's going to come on the inside. So when you're talking about chaos for me, you can't have too much chaos along the same side. So if you switch Havertz, mate, just really quickly to show that the Havertz will make that run and Jesus is in those zones, if you do that, and Martinelli wants to come inside, and Calafiori wants to go on the outside, this is where I worry with Jesus. I trust Trossard more in these zones to cover defensively, to cover that space, to be more diligent. Can Jesus stay in those zones, or will he dribble out of trouble and try to create chaos? And that, for me, is the issue with Jesus. And I actually do prefer Trossard in this role. In kind of being that more false nine presence, while Calafiori provides that kind of thrust on the outside. That's an option.
Another couple of options we haven't come to. Jorginho, any sort of involvement for Jorginho either against Spurs or beyond that you see happening?
Mikel would like to see it.
Yeah,
George would not.
These are the George versions, but yeah, would Jorginho be involved? How do you think Mikel will do that? Let's talk what Mikel might do for Spurs, because I do see this happening. Obviously, Rice would be out for Spurs, so I do sit there and hang on a minute. Have I got enough players? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, I have. How? Because I see Jorginho coming in, and Rice being out. Do you think he'll play party in the pivot, in that sort of second line in there alongside Havertz? This looks like a shape that Mikel might be more comfortable with personally, just because of the way his experience. He might then also ask Timber to come inside in that way as well, and sort of end up a little bit more like this and sort of pack the middle. Maybe a Havertz behind a Jesus or a Trossard. This is something I can see Mikel doing a lot more readily than say a Saka inside.
Yeah, I don't love it.
Yeah.
I think it can work as a false nine position. So don't get me wrong. You still got your two out of possessions, but you basically have Saka being the one to be the runner from out to in. And I feel like we've recruited one of the better ones in the league at doing that in Raheem Sterling. And I just want Saka to touch the ball more. In this setup, Saka's low touch and Saka's a runner, and Jesus is your high touch player who's dropping in to allow Havertz to run beyond the space behind. So it's a matter of who you want your high touches to be. And I think you're forcing Jorginho to have high touches and you're forcing Jesus to have high touches. And I'm asking you, are you comfortable with Spurs' high press and their high line?
Yeah.
Up against that, I don't know. Jorginho, for me, does his best work when he's got a run in the team, which is natural for somebody that is more of a deep lying playmaker who likes high touches.
Yeah.
I worry about him coming in cold, being able to do this. And I also worry defensively.
I agree.
In this setup.
And personally, I'd prefer something, if we're going to play with the Jorginho and a Partey, and we're going to be in these sorts of positions, I'd want to max out on, I'd go Sterling, I'd go Martin in the centre, I'd go Saka on the right, just to maximise that. If we're going to fully commit to Project Transition and Project Jorginho's doing all that short passing inside, Timber's in here, Spurs are stepping onto us high up the pitch, you have so many release valves in there. And then that I kind of see with the Jorginho. But if we're asking Jorginho to come up, and I'm not going to move all the players now, but if we're asking Jorginho to come up and sort of dictate play from here, I don't know. And I worry about us getting transition through if he's going to be in the sort of the centre circle doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I don't love the Jorginho aspect. And by the way, I also just feel that Calafiori, 2 weeks in, it's time. It's time. Everybody saw that performance versus France.
Yeah.
I don't really want to talk about the knock. That's so innocuous for me. I think he's fine. This is a starter, mate. I'm not comfortable not having that conversation with him. So I think Calafiori at left back is something that we need to see, and we need to see soon, especially before City. I don't want it to be the first time I see it. To be versus City.
Yeah.
So and there's no overlap. Like here, there's also no overlap. Again, Timber and Trossard are being those underlapping options. Even Jorginho, who wants to drop in quarterback. It's
But
all
keeps
players.
Wide.
There's no support down that way.
Yeah.
So no, I would definitely have Calafiori in at left back. And I mean, Timber has to become your decision between Timber and Partey. Who's in the anchor this midfield? That's the biggest question.
Yeah.
Do you want a Jorginho or do you want a better presence?
Stepping away from the tactics board for a second then, just to conclude this, because I do think it's an interesting thing, and I'm trying to sort of word this at the moment in a video. I don't know how used we are as fans at the moment to kind of replacing an asset like an Ødegaard. One, because I think we've been pretty lucky with injuries. Honestly, apart from Saliba, we've been pretty lucky with Saka. We've been pretty lucky with Rice. We've been pretty lucky with Ødegaard. We've been pretty lucky with Raya. We've been pretty lucky, overall. Okay, apart from that,
you're citing the players that played the most minutes for us.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a lot of minutes there, and a lot of times where they have been available. So one, I don't think we're particularly adjusted as fans and sort of as commentators and stuff in sort of finding ways of replacing players like this. So it's interesting. It's new territory for me, and because of that, I think sometimes we come to this thing of like, we either want to go to the market and say, well, why didn't we get a player who could replace them? And I'd firstly say we can't do that. We talk about Fabio Vieira. I think in the 4 games that Martin Ødegaard didn't start last season, Fabio Vieira didn't start in any of them. Emil Smith-Rowe looked at the numbers, and I think his last big 6 game where he started in the midfield was that Chelsea game in 2021. the one where Pablo Mari gets done by Romelu Lukaku. So Martin Ødegaard has become so important to this team. We're not used to doing this. And I wonder what your sort of approach is. Do you view it as like, because I don't view it this way. Do you view it as going like, we're going to try and replace him like for like and support that player? We're going to put Saka there and try and absolutely do everything around him. Or do you view it as I view it, you kind of split up the role a little bit. You go, right, well, in the mid block, what Ødegaard's doing here, I want Havertz to be doing that. In the transitions, I want sort of Trossard to be doing that. In the sort of in possession sort of combinations out wide, I want Saka to be doing that. That feels to me like a more sustainable way of doing it. Even if nominally you have someone on the paper who is replacing Ødegaard, you kind of split up his roles. That's what I feel, but I'm interested in your take as well.
I think when you have a player that you've seen never rotated, it creates doubt more than any other player.
Yeah.
You're talking about, and the one thing that I hope that you see through this video is that there's plenty of options, and we haven't even talked some of the creative with Ethan Nwaneri, and and we've sold 2 of our biggest options, and so there's a case to doom. But there's one thing that I look at here, and I just think, mate, Mikel, like, show me the creativity. How many of us have wanted us to see this creativity? And I look at it where, depending on the opposition, you may want Martin Ødegaard's role, and you may want like for like. There's other times when you won't. For example, Spurs is not a match that I feel we necessarily need a like-for-like Martin Ødegaard role. I'm sorry, Manchester City is not a fixture that he traditionally does well in. It's not something that I feel this team needs a like-for-like role in. We could look at different solutions for these games. And I hate to say it, Atlanta, who's another high-pressing team, look, it's maybe another Brighton in a sense. So, and how did he perform in terms of like for like in that role? So I think a lot of it has to do with your objective. I think when you look at how to replace somebody so integral who hasn't been replaced, what you look at is certainty, and you look at making sure that your replacements can give you what you're asking for. That's the one thing that you'll look for as a coach. So when you look at these solutions, if you notice, a lot of the solutions that we spoke about are players in their natural positions. There's been very few experimentation about trying to flip players into things that they don't know how to do. And that was on purpose for me in terms of suggesting, look, the only one was potentially Timber at right central midfield. And we've seen that ironically in zones at the back end of last season, and we've seen him do it. So even that is something that we've seen. One thing you never want to do for me is it's less about splitting the role, but it's more about guarantees and performance. for me. That's kind of the angle I look for. So if I'm going to replace Martin Ødegaard, who is such a consistent performer in so many aspects of our play, then make sure the replacements, they don't have to be like for like, but they have to consistently do their job. And together they can create the gap that we leave with Martin
that's what
Ødegaard.
I think that's what I feel. It's kind of like bridging the gap all together. Like no one player is going to come in and do what Martin Ødegaard. It's a fallacy. Like we might have been able to do that, you know, with Walcott for Oxlade-Chamberlain years ago, and kind of basically give him the same role. But that he's an £100 million asset. You can't replace him with one person, especially not with a teenager. So or you can, but you can't expect the same things. You have to judge them by different sort of metrics. So,
and the one thing I'll say with Ethan is, and I'll go on record because this hasn't really been a very Ethan heavy thing. I'm going to go on record and say, you give Ethan a chance, I think you're going to say he's our Martin Ødegaard's replacement. I believe that highly in the talent and in the player. The issue that I've got is these immediate 3 games. If this was at any point in the schedule other than these 3 games, I would be sitting here saying, no, I want Ethan in. And I'd be a lot harder in insisting on that. But it's just the level of opposition that we're playing in terms of Atalanta being one of the best teams in Serie A. We've got Spurs, a derby. Huge to introduce. The emotional, by the way, aspect of a Hale Ender starting, the onus and expectation on that is far too much. It's not the right environment for him. And then what, you're going to take him to the title challengers and ask him to do something at one of our most difficult grounds in the season, period? No, like that's not the way to integrate youth. I'm hoping to protect him in that way. And it has nothing to do, that's sorry for this disclaimer, on his talent. This is protecting youth. This I understand. If Mikel doesn't do this in these first 3 games, I completely understand it, and people should not be upset. Now, after that, against Leicester, against mid-table teams, let's have a discussion there.
Yeah, but these 3 games are huge, and it's going to be a big jigsaw puzzle piece to put together. Let us know what you thought in the comments. Let us know your sort of favoured solution for Spurs and beyond, what you think, how we're going to sort of replace Martin Ødegaard. And it's an ongoing discussion. You know, it's every single game is going to be different. People are going to be available. We don't know what injuries are going to be there in the future. We don't know how people recover. We don't know how long he's going to be out. There's so many moving parts. I think it's probably a discussion we're probably going to have certainly again on the podcast. And I can't wait for all the people who are going to say, George, it's Atalanta, not Atlanta. So I look forward to that, mate. Listen, thanks for being
Part
here.
of the problem is with all of these pronunciations, we have completely different dialects here. Like Atlanta is a city in the US that is very, very common. And we say Atlanta. Ajax.
Listen, the YouTube comments
is a town
don't care, baby. They don't
20 minutes away from my house.
They don't
so for me to like switch into Ajax and Atalanta, it's not something I say in my everyday.
English could be your 4th language, mate. They don't care.
It's true. I think at this point it is.
Football's the first language, baby. Yes. Thank you very much, George, for being here. Appreciate it, mate.
As always, thank you very much.
And thank you very much for being here as well, viewers and watchers at home and listeners and so on. Thank you for being here. We did, as we mentioned, do a rewatch. Go check that out in the comments below. You can watch it on a 7-day free trial on Patreon. Thanks for being here. And thanks for keeping it Arsenal.